This is the Mormon Mixed Faith Marriage Podcast with certified life coach Brooke Booth, episode number 99. All right, just in my seat. Sorry for the noise. So I just recorded this podcast and then a package got delivered and my dog barked a lot. So we're going to record it again. This is the 99th podcast episode for the Mormon Mixed Faith Marriage Podcast. Yay! Hooray! Let's celebrate that for a minute. I hope you found this podcast really helpful. I know it's helped me, and I've heard from some of my clients that they find it helpful. So I'm just going to keep on trucking here. Okay, this podcast is a topic I've been wanting to discuss on the podcast for some time. It's something I see regularly in myself, regularly in my clients. And so as per usual, I hope you also find it really helpful. And that is the idea of projection. Mirroring, I've also heard some people call it mirroring. Maybe they're different things, but I see them kind of as like two sides of the same coin. We'll talk about what they are. So here is a definition of projection by a licensed certified social worker. Her name's Karen Koenig. She says projection refers to unconsciously taking unwanted emotions or traits you don't like about yourself and attributing them to someone else. Here's some just really generic examples to get your brain thinking on what this may look like. A wife is attracted to a male coworker but can't admit her feelings. So that would be the unwanted emotion. So she becomes jealous and accuses her husband of being attracted to other women when her husband talks about a female coworker. Okay, that's attributing your own stuff to somebody else. Here's another example. A man who feels insecure about his masculinity mocks other men for acting like women, projecting unwanted emotions, attributing them to somebody else. So here's how it may look in a mixed faith marriage. Maybe you're afraid or ashamed or conflicted about your decision to leave the church. So you project those feelings onto your spouse. It may sound like they don't approve. They think I'm going crazy. They'll judge me, right? When in effect, in reality, you're not approving, you're judging yourself. Maybe you're insecure about your parenting in a mixed faith marriage. So that can come across as complaining or judging your spouse's parenting. They're too quiet. They're too vocal. They're not pushing the children enough. They're pushing too much. They're too preachy. They're not preachy enough. Anything like that. What our close relationships do for us is they kind of become like a mirror, like mirror and projecting are similar. A way to see ourselves and see the work that we may want to do in ourselves. Years ago, I heard this idea that I'm going to present to you here in a minute that was so fascinating to me. And it really got me thinking, like, is this really true? It's like, is that really going on? And this is what I heard, that the things we like in our spouse, traits, characteristics, attributes, things they do, whatever, are things that we also like about ourselves. And the things that we don't like about our spouse are the things that we actually don't like about ourselves. This was super fascinating to me at the time because it's humbling to start to ask yourself those questions like, okay, when my husband does this or that, or my spouse does this or that, and I get really frustrated and annoyed. Like, why? Like, is there something, do I do that? And I don't like that about myself? Or I think this is really great about them. Why? It really started to open up some interesting introspection for me. And I think it's the idea here is so similar, is these close relationships that we're in do provide a lot of information to us about ourselves. And are we receptive to that information? Are we learning from that information? Are we remotely curious about that information? Make a little caveat here, a little note, is sometimes something we see in our spouse is frankly just their work to do, that they need to address, that they need to unpack, that they need to sort through. It's not always projection. But, and I will say this, it's always worth checking. It's always worth asking the question, is this me projecting something onto them? Is this me mirroring my stuff on them? And because what I like to do here is it's an opportunity to see where can I control? What can I work on here? Where's something where I can spend my time and energy, and what's their work? What's theirs to do and what's mine to do? Sometimes we're too hasty to do one or the other. Sometimes we're too hasty to blame and dump everything on our spouse in a projection form. Sometimes we're too hasty to blame it all on ourselves and take responsibility for too much. And so it can be helpful to just check that. Okay, coming back to projection, I want to talk a little bit more about how it looked for me as another example. So this is something I found with projecting, it's like the examples given earlier. I'm just going to pause and talk about the definition of projection here to set up my example. The definition given earlier was where you have an unwanted emotion or trait that you don't like about yourself, and so you attribute it to something else. So this is precisely like, sometimes it's an unwanted emotion, an unwanted trait, it could be any number of things. Or a lot of times we think because we have it, that our spouse should also have that same value or the same concept or the same idea that we have. So it's a little bit of a more of expansive idea on projection that I want to talk about here. So for instance, I realized that I did not thrive when I was doing something from obligation, from pressure, not a good place for me, not a good place for me to make decisions about my marriage and to show up in my marriage and relationship when it was based on obligation or in other relationships. And I found I projected this onto my husband, and I assumed he couldn't thrive either if he was acting under obligation, that he shouldn't do that either, that it would also be bad for him or detrimental for him like it was for me. And that he can't and should not do anything from obligation. And if he is, then that's a problem, that I can't support that and I can't participate in that. And this was really interesting because I was projecting not just my unwanted emotions and traits onto him, but I was also projecting things I was learning about myself onto him. I was projecting the way I need to deal with situations. That's also the way he needs to deal with situations, or the way I feel about a situation is the way he should feel about a situation. Or if I don't feel like I should be doing things from obligation because I don't think it's healthy for me, he shouldn't do things from obligation because it's not healthy for him. That type of projection, I think, also needs to be looked at and examined, because I think it's way too broad stroked for one, but also he's a different person. Just because it doesn't work that way for me doesn't mean that I also get to now set the parameters and rules and criteria for his choices and his values and what works and doesn't work for him. So projection can also sneak in that way as well. Other ways I might see it is I want to go to church with him because if the roles were reversed, I would want him to go with me. That could be a form of projection or mirroring. He should make decisions based on the criteria that's healthy for me, right? So we project not just our unwanted emotions or unwanted traits. We might project our values, our reasonings, and our conclusions onto other people. And ultimately what we're doing, however it may look, if we're projecting unwanted emotions or we're projecting this is how you should think about this situation, or this is how I think about it, so of course this is the way you think about it, or you should think about it. Sometimes what we're doing is we're forgetting that they're two separate people here. Here is where differentiation and individuation come into play and need to be, acknowledged. That there truly are two separate people with different ways of thinking, feeling, and seeing the world. And different things work for us, and different things don't work for us. So when I start to become aware of how projection or mirroring may be happening in my relationship, and then I start to see where I'm closing the door to individuation or differentiation, and I'm starting to not give us permission to be two separate people. This can be helpful for me to look at and start to question that and create some space where we now can think differently about a situation or a circumstance, or feel differently about something. Or just because I feel a way about it doesn't mean he has to feel the same way about it. Or because I'm feeling a way doesn't mean that like that needs to be translated onto him. Or even if you're just ignoring or unconscious of what you're feeling and then just sort of pinning that onto them, it can be really helpful to start to consider that. What if we're both right here? He's having a certain experience, I'm having a certain experience, or she's having a certain experience, and I'm having a certain experience in this situation. And what if we were both right? Because a lot of times what happens with projection is we make it's easy for the other person to feel like they've been misunderstood or that there's a wrong attribution made, and a lot of times because there is. But then it can create this a little bit of defensiveness. That's not how I see it. Why are you ascribing that to me? That's not my experience with this situation. And we can sort of fall into a push-pull or a he said, she said kind of dynamic. And I like to open the door when we start to realize this is happening. I like to open the door and start to consider that, what if we're both right here? What if what we both think and feel and experience is right because it's our own thought and feeling and experience? And that just because we shared a similar circumstance or event, or we're at some place at the same time or in a conversation together, doesn't mean that we both have to walk away from it with the same thought and feeling and experience and conclusion. And then that opens the door to then we can both be right. There doesn't need to be a he said, she said, or this is what this is what happened and this is not what happened. Or both get to be right because both are entitled to their own view of things. Both are entitled to how they feel about the situation, how they think about it, what they make it mean, and they can make that mean very different things. So here's an example that I was thinking about how this could apply here. So I've heard it quite a bit that the believing spouse often feels betrayed when their spouse leaves the church. And instead of trying to convince that spouse that they shouldn't feel betrayed, that that's not a correct interpretation of this circumstance, or not a logical interpretation, or not a whatever, the right way of looking at this. When we approach it and we start to see maybe how projection might be going on, or that they're a separate person and they get to have their own experience, instead of trying to convince them that they shouldn't feel betrayed or that they shouldn't come to that conclusion, we can really open the door to just letting them have exactly what they're experiencing as real and valid and legitimate. And it is okay for them to feel like they're betrayed because that's their experience. That's exactly how they perceive what happened. And the other partner doesn't need to then turn it into a personal attack on themselves or an indictment of who they are as a partner or as a person. It's just the experience that their partner has, that their partner is now sharing with them. You don't have to show up defending yourself or convincing their partner that they're wrong. Really is a powerful way to show up accepting exactly where their partner is and having a lot of compassion for where they are. So think about how that might apply to you. Where is projection taking place? Do you need to bring some awareness to that? Where are you maybe not owning some of your own emotions that maybe you should process and work through if that's something you choose to do? Where can you let your spouse's experience be their experience? That doesn't need to be corrected or modified or put in alignment with your own conclusions or your own views of that experience, your own perceptions. And if they have their experience, can that just be their experience without it becoming an indictment on you or a personal attack on you? So you can really show up really validating them, accepting them, and letting their experience be their experience. And this can be a really powerful thing to do in a relationship. It can be a really beautiful thing to do in a relationship. If you think you want some more help doing this, a really great place to get some really hands-on practical help is to get hold of my online course. It is a full-length, in-depth, introspective, deep dive into your mixed faith marriage. And it will provide you with tools and ideas and concepts like this one to help you really be able to create who you want to be in your marriage, to really be able to help you show up the way you want to show up in your marriage, and to take responsibility for how you're projecting or not projecting and what you're doing in this mixed faith marriage. Go to brookeboothcoaching.com and click on work with me, and you should be able to read all about the course and see if it's a good fit for you and something that you would find valuable to help in your marriage. All right, wishing you the best.